moment, thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Environment and Performance Committee. My name is Councillor Claire Rylott, and I'm the chairman of this committee. Councillina Savikian is my vice chairman. Apologies. Before we move to the agenda this evening, our housekeeping rules are as follows. Restroom facilities are available on this floor for the ladies and down the main stairwell for the gentlemen. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, officers will escort all attendees to the nearest safety point. May I please ask that all persons addressing this meeting do so clearly through the microphone system at all times. I would at this point remind all persons in attendance that this meeting is being streamed live. Please be advised that abuse or intimidation of any kind will not be tolerated. Anyone who is deemed to breach this requirement will be warned and asked to refrain. And if the behaviour persists, they will be asked to leave the meeting. That concludes the housekeeping rules, and we will now move straight into part one of this evening's agenda and address the preliminary items. Item 1, to receive apologies for absence and notification of any substitute members.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Alison Austin, with Councillor Stephen Woodliff substituting, and further apologies from the portfolio holder, Councillor Anne Dorian, with portfolio holder Callum Butler substituting. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, to sign the minutes of the last meeting held on the 18th of June 2024. Do members agree the minutes, please? Item 3, to receive declarations of interest in respect of any item on the agenda. Does any member of this committee wish to declare any interest in any item on the agenda? Thank you. And 4, to answer any written public questions. Are there any?
No written questions, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. That concludes the preliminary items. We'll now move into part 2 of tonight's agenda, and our first item this evening is a report from the member working group that reviewed the car parking provision in Boston. This is on page 11 of the agenda, and Councillor Stuart Evans, who is a member of the group, is presenting the report, supported by the lead officer for the review, the Joint Deputy Chief Executive for Programme Delivery and Assistant Director for General Fund Assets, Mr. Andy Fisher. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, committee. I'm presenting this report this evening as one of the members of a members working group that recently undertook a review of car parks within Boston. Councillors Mike Gilbert and Ralph Pryke on this committee were also members of the working group and may wish to comment on this after my submission. Councillors Anton Danny and Chris Mountain made up the rest of the group. Following concerns in respect of ongoing decreases in car park income, members of this committee agreed the convention of a member working group to consider the decline in income across the council's 22 car parking sites. Members also agreed to consider the condition of the sites and the provision and quality of the current signage to the sites, including the seasonal problem of certain signs being hidden by overgrown foliage, both within the town and also along the main arterial roads into the town centre. The group did agree that a review of signage with reference to signs routing visitors to its own car parks would be productive. On receiving the relevant information sought from the initial scope of the review, the group held detailed discussions to identify the areas it wished to focus on and what, if any, changes could be successfully taken forward. Key areas identified included agreeing a pilot car park to change the existing size of the parking space to better accommodate today's larger vehicles. The group also recognised that certain sites were within highly prominent areas of the town, which would benefit from some low-cost enhancements to create a wider amenity supporting both nature and wildlife, Councillor Gilbert's team are already engaged in several projects around the town. The subject of providing free car parking was considered. However, once the group had considered the outcomes of a comprehensive financial modelling, which had been undertaken by the transformation team on the benefits of free parking, they supported the outcome of that modelling in that no free parking outside of any special periods be provided. The figures contained within this report are the figures that the group had at the start late last year. I believe Andy has handed around updated figures tonight. It was also agreed that a review of parking fees and charges to include exploring the introduction of shopper and commuter passes via the MI Permit app on the council's new parking machines. So if I could draw your attention to the 5 recommendations of this report for your consideration. Madam Chairman, that is my presentation. I would at this point, with your permission, like to ask my fellow councillors on the review group if they wish to add anything further prior to seeking the committee's consideration of this report.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Is there anything that Councillor Gilbert or Councillor Pryke would like to add?
No, I think that's very comprehensively covered. Thank you very much.
Councillor Pryke?
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously endorsing the working group's report. I'm particularly pleased that we didn't spend ages talking about free parking. As a member, I'm sure other members get members of the public saying silly things to us, like if the parking in Boston was free, we'd get far more people coming in. We spent some time looking at that and dismissed it because the supposed parallels, particularly Spalding, doesn't have endless free parking on council car parks. And the free parking that people on the whole talk about elsewhere are supermarket car parks with time limits. Tesco is a good, and Asda here is a good example of that. So I'm very pleased to endorse this, and I urge its recommendation to the exec board for implementation with its recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Izzard.
Yeah, I see the permit for a year is 160. Are you able to buy a yearly permit for all car parks at 160?
Okay, anything to do with pricing is probably best dealt with by our expert.
Thank you, Chairman. And anything to do with pricing is probably better dealt with my car parking lead officer rather than myself. The parking permit, if you follow, I think, to the back, you can probably see I've just broken the printer printing these out. The last one's gone and I haven't got the last page. Not all parking permits, councillors, are available in all car parks, but it does set out on our website where they are. And on the last page, I believe, of the fee structure, it should give you the list of car parks. But on the last copy that came out and didn't print, it's blocked. But there, on the back of the fee structure, there's 4 pages. It should lead you to where all of those are. And there are different periods of permit that you can buy as well.
Any more questions, anybody? You're all very quiet tonight. You did an excellent job, Councillor Gilbert. Well done. Councillor Woodliffe.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wonder what's the cost of maintenance of the car parks? Because obviously they do wear. I mean, it's necessary. So what's the actual cost of repairing the car parks? I've been looking through the figures. I haven't spotted it yet. Perhaps you can point me in the direction where it is.
Thank you, Chairman. No, that wasn't. That's not information I have to hand, but I can try and find that out for you. I can give you a global figure of what was spent out of the repairs and maintenance budget through the finance system. What I won't be able to do is to break that down easily per car park, because that's a narrative. But I will get that from my colleagues and send that out to the committee.
Anybody else got any comments to express or questions to ask? Well, thank you very much to all the group for this report. It's very comprehensive and very interesting. Looking at moving this forward, is everybody happy that the recommendations that were proposed in this report? And can we take a show of hands that you're happy to move it forward, please? Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. Our second report this evening is the joint scrutiny of the scope and proposed arrangements for sub-regional leisure facilities operator contract. This item is on page 49 of the agenda and will be presented by the portfolio holder, Councillor Sarah Sharp, who is supported by the Assistant Director for Leisure and Culture, Mr. Phil Perry, and our Scrutiny Officer, Rebecca James.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here to present the joint scrutiny of the scope and proposed arrangements for a sub-regional leisure facilities operator contract report and to seek approval for the recommendations. The report can be found at Appendix 1, which starts at page 53 of the agenda. The recommendation...
Sarah, can you just speak up a bit, please?
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. Thank you very much. Thanks.
The recommendation is to note the attached report, Appendix 1, and agree the associated recommendations. This was a joint piece of work with the Scrutiny Task and Finish Group, comprising of 3 councillors from each council in the partnership. For Boston, it was Councillors Welbury, Drayton and Gilbert. A full list of those involved can be found on page 53 of the agenda. The task group were asked to undertake a review of the scope and proposed arrangements for a sub-regional leisure facilities operator contract. Full details of what the group were asked to look at can be found in the scoping document at Appendix 2, page 57 of the agenda. Scrutiny committees at all 3 councils wanted to be reassured that any reports to committees contained enough information for councillors to be able to make an informed decision on a proposed leisure facilities contract at future meetings. Further details of the rationale behind the proposal were requested, as well as clarification on various details of the proposed contract. The head of procurement attended to provide information along with portfolio holders to provide their view on the process. Following discussions, the task group made a number of recommendations for consideration. These can be found at page 56 of the agenda. Rebecca James and Phil Perry will assist in answering any questions the committee may have, and perhaps the councillors involved may also want to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions, please, to the officers here?
Just to say that as somebody who participated in this, I feel quite reassured that as elected members, we will be kept well informed about the progress of the discussions and negotiations going forward. And I think it's a good example of how, you know, the democratic process is supposed to work.
Thank you, Councillor Gilbert. Anybody else got any comments to make on this work, please? Hey, obviously we're all very quiet again on the matter, so we're obviously all very happy. We'll soon be going home at this rate. Yeah, it's a football match. So as you were told, the recommendations are on page 56. And are we all happy to move these recommendations going forward, please? Show of hands. Thank you. Yeah, that's unanimous again. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item of business is a report to consider statutory restrictions to control indiscriminate feeding of wild birds in designated areas of Boston Town Centre, which is on page 69. This report is being presented by portfolio holder Councillor Callum Butler, who is supported by the Assistant Director for Regulatory, Mr. Christian Allen. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good evening, fellow councillors. I'm presenting this report on behalf of Councillor Dorian. The paper tonight relates to the proposed extension to the PSPO, or Public Space Protection Order, to include the facilitation of enforcement action regarding the feeding of wild birds within a specified area of Boston Town Centre. Concerns have been raised to the Council by members of the public that the number of birds within the town centre area are causing a number of issues. These include damage to buildings with guano, making our town street and furniture dirty and unkempt, and also causing a wider health issue with the sheer volume of faeces. While there is no current law to stop people from feeding birds, local authorities can adopt restrictions through the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014. This allows for restrictions to be implemented on certain areas. Before a PSPO can be installed, a public consultation must take place. This was done from the 1st of May until the 31st of July 2024. The consultation found that of the 222 residents that responded, 82% felt that there was an issue with bird feeding and 86% supported the council taking enforcement action on people who were feeding the birds. The area that is proposed is highlighted in red on page 87 and includes the marketplace, South Street, around the stump, Wide Bargate and Straight Bargate, and part of Wide Bargate, including the War Memorial and Garden of Remembrance. Anyone found to be feeding the birds within the PSPO area would be liable to a fixed penalty notice, or FPN, of a maximum of £100 as prescribed in legislation. Failure to pay could lead to a prosecution and a fine of a maximum of £1,000. I recommend that the committee consider the feedback from the public consultation and provide their own feedback and opinions to assist Cabinet to determine whether a PSPO should be introduced to help with the feeding of wild birds in the above designated area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. So do we have any observations that we'd like to make other than what's been suggested here? Councillor Gilbert.
Yeah, I'd just like to add my weight to this report. I've commented numerous times in the past about the number of birds that we've got in the town centre and the antisocial activities of those birds in terms of pooing and just basically their presence. We have some marvellous buildings. We're trying to sell Boston town centre as a visitor destination, and in my opinion, you know, the number of and the volume of birds we've got in the town centre detracts from that. I would like us to sort of implement this, but also extend our concerns, extend our thoughts to the number of seagulls that we've got in the area. I know specifically this seems to be about pigeons, but we also have a very major seagull problem in the town centre as well. And they also affect the marketplace and the quality of the visitor offer there. A lot of these seagulls, as in my case, I've got one nesting on my chimney pots. I'm going to get a scaffold up there and I'm going to prevent it coming back next year. And I think we should encourage some of the businesses, for example, Outreach, BT, to do a similar thing to assist the town in that way. It's not just a pigeon problem, which it is a problem, but it's also a seagull problem as well.
Thank you, Councillor Gilbert, for your comments. Anybody else? Councillor Andy Izzard, please.
Good evening. Is there any kind of evidence that stopping feeding of the wildlife or the birds is going to make them go away? Is there any kind of evidence you've used from another town, another location? Because obviously from London, we don't seem to be able to solve the problem by just not feeding the pigeons. So I wondered what evidence there might be that you've researched and been able to come up with. That's the first question. The second question is, while we bring in this policy, are we going to have a little bit of leeway that, say, a child walking through decides to drop some crusts on the floor, that the fining is not going to take place, that maybe we can bring it in with a warning system until such time as we feel that the policy is known about by the general public?
I'll patch to Christian, if that's all right, Andy. Thank you. Councillor Izard, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think just returning to the second part of your question first, if I may. In terms of enforcement, then we will carry out, if committee support and cabinet support the implementation of a PSPO, we will carry out 3 months worth of education and promotion through all our social media channels, advice on the ground that from officers that are out in the town. And then we won't enforce probably until January in the new year to allow that education campaign to sort of run its course. There is reasonableness built into the draft PSPO. So if you look at the offence as it's currently drafted, this is in the papers that were handed out before the meeting. Unfortunately, wasn't available prior to this. There is a limitation where it says without reasonable excuse. So that does imply that the enforcement officers, and this will be our Kingdom Envirocrime officers, do have to exercise some judgment as to whether they issue a fixed penalty or not. We'll never issue fixed penalty notices to children, for example, because we're not statutorily entitled to do that. They have to be above a certain age. So there are safeguards in place that will prevent what might be perceived to be overzealous enforcement. Just coming back to your first point, I mean, in terms of evidence, we have reviewed best practice that's happening elsewhere around the country. I've mentioned in the report a couple of councils that we've engaged with to see how they're performing in terms of their PSPOs. But I think I'm not going to sit here and promise that if we stop feeding of birds, the whole problem is going to go away. It will involve other measures that we are exploring that will help back up the statutory controls in the town centre. So other sort of pest, using other pest control methods to deter birds from the town centre. And it is wild birds generally. I know you made a distinction about pigeons, but the order's applicable to feeding of any wild birds. That can include seagulls, but it can include things other than pigeons, I think is what, and there's a statutory definition for what wild birds are. And it's very broad, as you might imagine. So yes, I think it's not the be all and end all. Things like cleaning, obviously cleansing is very important. Education of the public's important. Having good adequate signage around the town centre, all of these things help to contribute to the effectiveness of controlling wild birds in the town centre. The PSPO isn't the only answer, but it's part of the toolkit that we can deploy to help mitigate the issues.
One more, looking at the area, you didn't include the front part of Central Park where the play equipment is. Is there a reason why that was not included in this area?
Yeah, the designation is drawn deliberately tightly because we have to be satisfied that there is evidence through consultation that the issues around wild birds are creating problems. In Central Park, they don't create the same problems. It's more of a natural environment where you'd expect to find birds, and in fact, part of our campaigning around encouraging people to do the right thing in the town centre may actually be to encourage people to feed birds either in their gardens or maybe in Central Park as a better, more appropriate location to feed birds rather than in the marketplace or by the War Memorial or Ingram Memorial, etc.
Following on from what Councillor Izzard said, though, and I understand what he's saying about Central Park. Central Park isn't actually very far away from the town, so you're still going to attract those birds within the town area. So are you actually going to solve your problem? Because if you feed them in the park, birds fly, they're still going to be getting rid of their excrement everywhere.
Yes, and I think this is where we need to look at other measures to control and prevent pigeons from entering the town. That you can't just, the PSPO in its own right isn't the only thing that we probably need to do. There are other control measures like proofing, for example, those buildings that we can do, and encouraging businesses in the town centre to proof their buildings. You'll see if you walk in the town centre, there's some buildings where there's evidently been proofing applied and there's no pigeons on them at all. whereas next door a building may not be proofed and you'll see pigeons roosting all over it. So I think there's some work that we also need to do with the businesses in the town to encourage them, if we can manage the population generally, to encourage them to do more proofing work.
Thank you. Thank you, Christian, for your answers. Thank you. Councillor Drayton.
Yes, it's a well-known fact. If you want to stop birds, pigeons, seagulls, you get something like a cheap ornamental owl, plastic, put it up on the building, and the birds won't come there. There's all kinds of different plastic things. That's a cheaper option than going spending loads of money. And maybe we should pilot it somewhere in the town to see if it actually works. You know, because it'd be friendly towards the birds, really, but I think that would solve a lot of the problems. Okay?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm all in favour of this generally, just almost playing devil's advocate a little bit. There's lots of signs in the world saying that we can and can't do things, but mostly that we can't. So is there any mileage in pointing out to people that there are areas where you can feed birds? Obviously not the town centre, but there's a place, as you all know, by where North 40-foot Bank joins Brothertoft Road at the end of Punchbowl Lane, where there's swans, ducks, geese, and probably dodos there. People are regularly feeding their animals there. There's plenty of grass. It really is an ideal place where I can't see the birds causing any problems. So would there be any mileage in putting on the signs that there are places that people can go to feed birds?
I think perhaps not the signs, but there's certainly opportunity within the campaign, the promotional campaign before the controls are implemented, that, you know, this is not all about, you know, it's about managing the problem, not eliminating the problem. We're not suggesting in any respect that we bring in this PSPO and suddenly there'll be no pigeons in the town centre. That's not the objective we're seeking to achieve. We're just seeking to change people's behaviours so they're discouraged from the town centre and perhaps encouraged elsewhere. So I think your suggestion is part of that encouraging elsewhere sort of strategy. So we need to make sure that's included in our comms. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Marson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going back to the fines bit again. Right, so it's going to take time for people to get used to the fact that they get fined. I'm an offender. I'm sorry, but I love animals and I feed the pigeons. I'm sorry, I do. When I'm having a sandwich, I chuck them a bit of bread. And you're going to get a lot of elderly people that aren't on social media, probably going to town once a week for the market or whatever, and they'll be sat on the bench waiting for the bus, and they'll perhaps be having something to eat, a pigeon, and they'll give them something to eat. Now, to me, that's if there's an officer in the area giving out fines, they should be giving them, like, do you know what, you shouldn't really be doing that because we're giving out fines. Give them a warning, and can we make sure that if they are going around, enforcement officers giving out tickets for this, that they are as lenient as they can be, because some of them are very ticket slap happy, and to put it quite mildly, do you know what I mean? And I don't want to see old Doris, who's 89 years old, sat there waiting for a bus getting an £100 fine, to be honest, for throwing a bit of bread to a pigeon. Other than that, yeah, I think it's right that you should be doing this, but I think that we've got to be very careful the way we go about it for the fines and who gets fined, and the warnings. I think it should be warnings, people. Thank you.
I mean, the education campaign, that sort of 3-month period needs to be as comprehensive as possible and covering all sorts of different media channels and press, etc., as broadly as possible, so that we reach the whole cross section of the diverse population we have in Boston. In terms of the enforcement, the worst thing you can do with enforcement is be inconsistent. So we need to be absolutely consistent in terms of how we enforce. Otherwise, we'll quickly lose the support of the public. So when we bring in enforcement, we do need to apply it rigorously. But there is judgment built in to the way that the Kingdom enforcement operators operate, and no one wants to see FPNs issued which bring the council into disrepute because they've been issued poorly or without a common sense or judgment. So the enforcement officers have that discretion already within their sort of toolkit.
Councillor Pryke.
Thank you. I support this completely. When it came to the map, I was surprised by how relatively restrictive the red line is. Of course, like everyone else, I've seen the birds gathered around the memorial causing quite a problem there. And in some cases, pigeons harassing people. But I've also observed bird problems, guano and whatnot, in Dolphin Lane and Pump Square in particular, and also Church Street Alley, the pedestrian bridge over the river, sometimes encouraged by people in the outside part of the pub tossing crisps to, well, not passing birds, birds perching on the fence there. How easy would it be to extend the red line area?
We can adjust the red line area. It's a proposal. It's a proposal that we've been out to consultation with. I suppose I'd want to be entirely satisfied that the feeding of birds in those areas was encouraging bird activity in those areas, if that makes sense. I suppose what I'm saying is, you mentioned Dolphin Lane, for example. What this PSPO won't do is stop birds coming into town and being in the town centre. This is all about stopping people feeding the birds and discouraging them from the town centre. So the designated area needs to make sure that we encompass all of those areas where we know from experience or feedback from consultation that that's where bird feeding takes place. I haven't seen any specific evidence about that, about the locations that you mentioned being problematic. But I'm willing to sort of take that feedback on board and consider it when we finally sort of prescribe the designated area, the PSPO.
So you're not going to tell the birds they're not allowed to come into town? I'm more than in support of all of this. I had a fight with a pigeon one day and it wasn't very pleasant. No, it was a seagull, actually. Not very pleasant at all.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I broadly support this. I think my only concern is that actually, I suspect the pigeons come to town as much to roost as they do to anything else. I'm sure they're attracted by food from people, but I suspect also that roosting, because I say it's probably warmer in the centre of the town at night than it probably is in the in the rural area around the outside. So I suspect it hopefully will have some impact, but we can't be sure it's going to be an absolute impact. Another thing is around the stump. That's private property in a way, isn't it? I'm not sure what the ruling is, but I get a feeling from what I've been told is that much of the area around the stump belongs to the stump. It's church property. Is the stump, or is St Botolph's fully in support of this, or what? Because they have quite a pigeon problem, don't they?
Yes, I've spoken directly to Adam Kelk at the stump, and he's entirely and wholeheartedly supportive of this approach. Right. He does recognise that the church itself, Boston Stump, does need some improvement measures brought into place to proof the building as much as they can. And I know he's also engaging with pest control companies that provide proofing measures to look at what they can do within the constraints of the building being a listed building and within a conservation area.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's I will support the motion. I think we have to do something to protect the central part of the town, and it is very unpleasant to walk in bird poo. It's even more unpleasant if it drops on your head. So and it's having very much on my head, plenty of anybody else, but it becomes very unpleasant indeed. So it'll have my full support. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Woodliff. Yes, I agree with what you're saying, and actually, pigeons only come when they know that there's food. And living in the area that I live in at the moment, I'm surrounded by cabbage fields, and we've been inundated with pigeons. So if we can stop people feeding the pigeons in the centre of the town, I think they will disperse, hopefully. Councillor Gilbert.
Very much. Just a few comments arising from some of the discussion that's been going on. We do have quite a few vacant buildings and fairly significant vacant buildings in the town centre at the moment. And obviously looking at other deterrents, I think you mean those spikes, don't you, which you attach to window ledges and things like that. I mean, they're essential in terms of deterrence. London used to have a major problem in Trafalgar Square with pigeons. I remember that as a child, and then they've all gone. I was down there at the weekend and there's no pigeons in Trafalgar Square. So whatever they did down there, I mean, maybe Andy knows, maybe Councillor Izzard knows as a Londoner, it worked. And we can obviously apply the same principles to Boston Town Centre. I think it will be spiked deterrence and an absence of feeding opportunities, and they will probably go. I was just wondering about in relation to Councillor Marsden's comments about the elderly and young people having some clear signage for the benefit of humans, not pigeons, explaining that, you know, you're not able to feed the pigeon, something with a red line through it that says that's not allowed. Very easy to identify in any language would be helpful if there is such signage, and if maybe there isn't such signage, we could perhaps design some ourselves so we can put them up in relevant places. And the final thing in relation to whether we extend the area would be to have a review after 6 to 9 months at this committee and just have a look at how it's all progressed, whether or not it's worked, what other mitigating issues might need to be considered.
Yeah, I think the review's an excellent idea, and in any case, a PSPO needs to be reviewed every 3 years. So, but there's no reason why we can't review before then. I don't want members to think that we introduce this PSPO and the problem's going to go overnight. So that's why I'm looking at alternative or other measures to take in addition to this. That will help displace, disperse, remove pigeons from the town centre. But it's going to take, it's not something that'll be achieved in months. It'll be achieved in years. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, like you rightly said, I think those plastic spikes work on buildings, don't they? And actually, I found a couple of tinfoil trays on a piece of string. Makes them run away because they don't like the noise.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Right, my question has been pretty much touched on in a couple of places. The area of the PSPO surely at this point should include the PE21 project, should it not? Because that will clearly need something like that as well. And it's going ahead, so rather than reviewing it, just a thought. Thank you.
I think we would bring in a PSPO to cover that area. We have to have evidence. To bring in a PSPO, you have to be able to evidence that through public consultation. So we wouldn't be able to bring it in preemptively for PE21, for example, because we wouldn't have that evidence. However, it could be something that we could easily do if it became apparent that pigeons were a problem in that location. It'd be something we could bring in fairly easily, or even extend the existing one fairly easily.
Okay, I didn't know that. Thank you.
Councillor Marson.
Thank you. I've said it before in the meetings, and I'll say it again now, like with signage and things like that. The best way to educate the most amount of people is through children. If you was to do a competition, maybe for the schools to do a sign, the best one wins. You could do a primary school one, a secondary one. Then the children are going home telling their parents what they're doing a sign for, and they're telling their grandparents what they're doing a sign for. The school all know what they're doing sign for, and then you can also put across the reasons why we need to stop the pigeons and why the sign's being made, and then pick out the winners and maybe let them have a sign each somewhere in town, whoever's won. And that is the best way to educate, because then it's also because a lot of the Eastern European children speak for their parents because they speak English, so they tell their parents everything, and then that way you're getting it across to everybody. Thank you.
Councillor Butler.
Just to come back on Councillor Marston and Councillor Gilbert's comment. Firstly, Councillor Gilbert, with your signage, I think there's temporary signage up in town at the moment anyway, and I think it says "Do not feed the birds," and then there's, I think, a circle with a bird with some crumbs or something on the floor with a line through it, which is pretty self-explanatory. Fully support your idea, Councillor Marston. Councillor Baxter and myself have done something similar in Old Leek and Wrangle with dog fouling, got the kids involved, and yeah, it, as you say, educates the children who then go home and tell the parents. So yeah.
Councillor Pike.
I meant to ask this earlier on. The penalty notice is £100 for these sort of things. Do you know if any of the other councils who've had taken similar action to this have varied that at all, less, or wanted to charge more? And obviously, if somebody doesn't pay, then it escalates like all fines do. But I don't know whether other councils get their results charging less, as it were.
That's a really good question, and it's a point I'm getting clarification on. My understanding is that the fines that you can issue for a PSPO are fixed by statute, but I am seeking advice currently from our legal advisor who's helped draft the order just to absolutely clarify that. But my understanding is it's fixed at a statutory level, and you can't introduce discounts for early repayment, for example. But I will check that out, and that yeah, absolutely, yes. It's exactly a question mark on the current draft order you have in front of you for that reason.
So thank you very much, everybody, for all your comments on this proposal. I think we've all expressed a view, so thank you. All that information will be fed back, and we'll see what happens next. Really, not fed back to the birds, no. Fed back to the next tier of councillors. So thank you very much. Anyway. Finally, we have the work programme on page 90. Members will note that we've already have 2 reports scheduled for the next meeting. Is there anything else that members wish to see? Christian, do you have anything to add? Like the first day back at school, everybody's so quiet. Okay, in that case, then we'll close this meeting. Thank you all for attending. And as you can see, we have our next meeting on the 26th of October.